Hello and welcome to ITWeb TV live from ITWeb Security Summit 2025 in association with Snowed Technologies. I'm joined now by Dr. Bianca Lins, who is the legal officer and lead for the Space Department, the Office of Communications at Liechtenstein. Bianca, welcome. How are you? Thank you. I think we've got some very interesting topics to cover, particularly about LEO satellites. But let's do a more broad start. Space-based communications have been a part of our lives for a long time. They're involved in banking, obviously aviation, GPS. There's a whole kind of wealth of where they integrate with our lives. Why do you think the cybersecurity risks are largely invisible? Are we kind of aware of them? Are hackers aware of them? How active an area is this? Is this something that's not really being explored? Is this something that I'm just not aware of, which is entirely possible? What's your kind of understanding of how active it is?
Well, first of all, I think the space itself is a topic that for many people still seems very into science fiction. It's field of exploration, but most people of the public, I think, do not realize how much our daily lives already depend on satellite communications. As you said, financial transactions, aviation, GPS, and so on. Without satellites, everything come to a complete standstill. And the thing was, of course, it's already decades now that we have satellites up in orbit, but we started with broadcast satellites, with military satellites. At the time when we started with satellites, cybersecurity was absolutely no issue. Nobody thought about that. And even if somebody would have thought about it, everybody would have said, any
What if? Yeah.
a satellite. No. Security by obscurity was kind of the main motto, so to say. Times changed and the systems are getting more digitalized. This also creates more entry points. You don't have just a satellite who might be hacked. You have had a complex infrastructure, ground segment and flick segment and the user segment, and then of course the space segment. Especially the link segment is something that is really exposed. If it's not authenticated, it's well protected. But one of the main exploits, so to say. And in 2022, I think was really the turning point for cybersecurity related frauds in space systems. It really was a marking point in this change of how space-based cybersecurity threats are perceived. Because as I'm sure you remember, in 2022, the Russians invaded the Ukraine. And at the very beginning of this war was not physical invasion or like starting ground, but it was actually a cyber attack on Viasat's AZ-700. And yeah, by that, they hacked the satellite, or not the satellite itself, but the system, the network. And it's meant a huge loss of communications for the military in the Ukraine and also the armed forces, the governments. And it also showed that, how space systems are used up for this kind of actions. Also how dual use of commercial satellites that are not only used for commercial reasons, but also for military reasons are now a very attractive target.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I suppose we've had the idea of undersea cables. I mean, South Africa's kind of, what's the right word? We're reliant on them, heavily reliant on them. Over the past 20 years, probably since Security Summit, we've seen them expand and expand. Currently, one of the cables, the WAX cable, the West African cable system's down at the moment. We've seen more and more cables come, but we have had incidents where they've accidentally gone down. There was maybe an incident internationally around Europe where one of the cables was cut. We're aware of those. But perhaps the satellite builds in the redundancy, the resiliency that we're able to kind of. But if that's also now under threat as well, it creates a more dangerous environment, I guess. So, I mean, are there any specific threats is there a specific type of group that's going after these satellite links? Or was that a one-off because of the war? Is this a growing area and we've got APT groups? Are we now going to start seeing more satellite specialist kind of bad actors?
I mean, Of course, this one hack at the very beginning of the war is the most visible hack, so to say. But of course, there are many other wars that happened in the years before, but most of them just don't make it to the public because maybe they're too sensitive, because of national security, or they are not disclosed due to reputational reasons or something like that in the private industry. From the threat perspective, I would say it's pretty similar like with any other sector, because of course now with the geopolitical time we're facing, I think it's more APT attacks and kind of threat actors like these that are backed by a regime. 2024, for example, there was a broadcasting satellite, and it was actually extras that are allegedly linked to Russia who intercepted deliberately the link for broadcasting services, and interfered with TV in Europe, for example, the Dutch baby TV. Instead of baby TV, they brought in Russian propaganda content there. But I think from the military perspective, there's something going now because the world's kind of, everybody is
Tense. Yeah.
it's really tense now. And these are the systems that, because when you think like how much we are already connected, yeah, and even now with cars and everything and planes and so, and they are connected to the satellite, and if you can manipulate that, yeah, that you can really cause a lot of harm without using a tank or also.
Bianca, I think one of the most pressing issues, we talked briefly about the geopolitical issues. Starlink is a controversial subject locally. There's a whole issue, you may have been following this, and our president having to go to the Oval Office and Elon Musk standing quietly. But I think there's a demand, there's a kind of pull that we should have local Earth orbit satellites. And obviously Starlink's the biggest of all the kind of network providers. But there are, I think, there's sovereignty issues there. There are potentially, what's the right word? Diplomacy issues. Suddenly, if we fall out with America, even though Starlink's a private company, I think we saw with the way that the US president decided to kind of change things with the tariffs, with like his stance on certain allies and former enemies, and like the world certainly is tense, it's in flux. When we come to something like Starlink and these kind of satellite communications, where they're owned by other private states that perhaps are, what's the right word, linked to national interests, what are the risks there? If we take on Starlink or any of the other services, are we beholden to them? Where is our data? Is it being transmitted? Is it kind of kept locally? Is it being transmitted to the US? Is it being stored in data centers? I'm asking you lots of things you might not know the answer to, but I think you probably got as good an idea as anyone that I've met.
Regarding the data, it was just mentioned earlier from the speaker before me, and he said that just 2% of the data are really located in Africa. So already today, most of your data is stored somewhere else in the world. Most likely, it's always the United States with Google, with AWS. When it comes to satellites and especially these mega constellations, I mean, we do have a variety of different operators, but the problem is that building up a mega constellation is really cost intensive. We have Starlink now, who is obviously the biggest one with several thousand satellites now in orbit, and others are also catching up. I mean, Eutelsat is with OneWeb building up now this new constellation, but it's not close to how big Starlink is going to be. And also Amazon's Kuiper is also now coming with or planned thousands of satellites. And again, these are always US-based companies, except Eutelsat, of course, it's European. But neither Europe nor Africa really has an answer, it seems to me, to this issue. Because if we all rely on this one company or the two companies and they're all from one country, in times like when there's such big shift in how the geopolitical and diplomacy is working now, to me it's a big concern now.
Yeah. I think four of the big kind of cybersecurity players essentially are the US, China, Russia, and Israel. And she was saying that a lot of our tech stack is US based, even though we are open to partnerships with China as one of our mobile network operators is kind of uses a lot of Chinese equipment. There's obviously kind of a bit of interplay there, and I think we're kind of geographically, but also politically, kind of stuck between the two. Yes, I suppose it does kind of put us in an interesting position.
I mean, with China and Europe, it's something. I mean, Europe is building up now Ares Square. It's like a very secure constellation, but not as big as a Starlink, something like that. But it won't be an option for Europe to work in this regard with Chinese operators, because I don't know if you know about that. There is in the European security strategy, you should not use, for example, for 5G networks, Chinese vendors and suppliers. Yeah. So, of course, can't use the satellite company.
Interesting times. To go back to the satellites, I mean, you mentioned at the beginning that, the satellites went up, I'm going to say 50 years ago. They obviously went up without having that kind of software and security, the ability to patch the security aspects. So how do we go about doing that? I mean, I'm guessing that the LEO satellites that are going now with Starlink, knowing what I know about Elon Musk's background, I'm assuming he's kind of figured that it should be software updatable over the air, potentially. But yeah, I mean, how do we go about solving that?
Well, it's true. The newer satellites are, of course, well, most of them at least have better protection and better systems so that you really can send an update, for example. But I wouldn't, like uh, sign a contract to say really all the new LEO satellites are like this, because you have, of course, a lot of satellites come from academic institutions and so, which are not, yeah, maybe don't have the same requirements. But with the legacy satellites, the problem really is that you can't do anything, yeah? I mean, if it wasn't built in at the time, you can't go up there and send someone and say, okay, please go up there and patch it. Yeah? That's not possible.
Yeah.
So they just stay unencrypted and unauthenticated. And there was just a case. There's Helium satellite operator Iridium. And already in 2014, it was revealed that their data was sent unauthenticated and it could be intercepted. And just, I think, 2 or 3 months ago, a group of white hat hackers was looking again at Iridium, and it's still the same. Nothing changed, of course, and still the same legacy satellite system. But they also have not just commercial clients, they also have government clients. One of them is the US DoD, the Department of Defense. And they have like tens of thousands of devices that are linked to this Iridium satellite. But of course, I mean, it's the Department of Defense. They do have a gateway where the traffic that goes through is encrypted. But the hackers were able to locate each single device due to the fact that whenever they were linked to the satellite, they were able to locate the device in a radius of 4 kilometers. And this is like really, yeah, you can't really do about it. I mean, what's coming now is in-orbit servicing. So in the next few years, this I'm sure will grow very much, but I'm not quite sure how much this will help for legacy systems.
So I think I'm going to say this is all pie in the sky. It's all it's kind of out there for your typical CISO who's either running a South African bank or the cybersecurity teams who are protecting organizations on the ground here. How much of a concern should this be? This whole kind of field of satellite communications and the ability of, the cybersecurity around it? Or is it something that, most of us are probably okay?
No, that's something that really should be a big concern for any company, I think. Any company should include space in the cybersecurity strategy. They should think about if they are connected to any satellite operator, if they're using any services, if there is any third-party risk, and really look what would happen if we are connected to a satellite and it doesn't work anymore. What would happen with our systems? What would be the cascading effect, so to say? Because, for example, in the war, when the BSAT hack happened, there were more than 5,800 wind turbines that went offline in Germany.
Okay.
And each single one of them had to be restarted, the modems, manually. So there had to be a person go there to the wind turbine and restart it again. This took weeks, of course. So I think space should be in any cybersecurity strategy.
So, I mean,
No, if you're not linked, but you should at least think about it.
yeah, I mean, we talked in one of the previous conversations about quantum cryptography or quantum safe cryptography, and the idea that you've got to go and discover like where that outdated cryptography sits in order to replace it and update it. How would a CISO be able to kind of, or a security team be able to work out how reliant they are on satellite systems? I mean, if you're a bank, you know that you've got ATMs rurally and they've got the satellite. But as a general business, I mean, the idea for, I think Vodacom is teaming up with Project Kuiper. I think MTN has done something with Starlink, has done tests, pilots. So if they're using those satellites for backhaul and you're just using a regular cell network, like who is responsible in that? Because that's, I guess, your third-party risk. It's you're relying on MTN for your connectivity, but suddenly a factor beyond your, I guess, oversight is like suddenly involved.
It doesn't mean that you always really can do anything about it, but you should be aware about it. Or you should be aware what would happen or what could happen. A very important point is, for example, if you have like logistics or things like this, people often forget that IoT and especially logistics or agriculture or things like this are also connected now with satellites. So what happens if this doesn't work anymore? You need any kind of redundancy plan. You need to, you know, not start thinking, okay, what could I do now when something already happened? You have to have an idea what to do if it's really coming to you.
The more I sit in this chair and the more I talk to the cybersecurity experts, the more worried I get.
I think the main point really is I mean, I think cybersecurity or people who work in cybersecurity are saying this since decades now, but it still holds true. We need to raise the awareness there. The most entry point is human factor, of course. So we really need to enhance this awareness, make people clear that how easy they can be targeted, how easy they can be a victim to phishing or to social engineering. And so especially with AI, the more we get connected and the more digitalized our lives is, the more it's important to really have this human factor as the last line of defense.
Okay. Dr. Bianca Lins, that's been fascinating. Dr. Bianca Lins from the Space Department for the Office of Communication in Liechtenstein. Please stay tuned for more interviews.